During the height of tensions between the US and the Soviet Union, B-59 submarine of the Soviet Union was hidden underwater just a few kilometers away from America in the Caribbean Sea, ready to strike. However, the US Navy discovered its presence and dropped small depth charges to bring the submarine to the surface. The Soviet submarine had lost contact with its headquarters from thousands of kilometers away, leading its captain to believe that war might have already begun, and that it was time to launch a nuclear torpedo. This was a critical moment when the US and Soviet Union's tensions had reached their peak, with thousands of nuclear missiles poised to launch at the press of a button. Just as the captain of the Soviet submarine was about to press the button to launch the nuclear missile, something unexpected happened that saved the world from total destruction. Welcome back, viewers of EduVenture, to our program. This incident took place during the historic 12 days when the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union was spiraling out of control. The context of this event traces back to the aftermath of World War II, when the entire world witnessed the devastating effects of nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, showcasing the dangerous power of the United States. The only country capable of challenging the US was the Soviet Union, as they had quickly developed nuclear technology after World War II. Through several nuclear tests, the Soviet Union indirectly signaled to the US that they were not Japan and would not silently endure attacks. This was the era of the Cold War, when both the US and the Soviet Union kept their nuclear weapons ready against each other at all times, whether for attacks by ground, air, or ocean. The world was well aware that if either country initiated a nuclear attack, the other would respond with its own nuclear missiles, leading to catastrophic destruction far worse than the bombings of Japan. It was believed that such attacks could potentially wipe out 70% of the world population. To make these attacks more effective, American and Soviet bomber aircraft were constantly airborne, and their nuclear submarines hid in international waters, awaiting orders. Additionally, the US had installed nuclear weapons in Turkey and Italy. Because these two countries were NATO allies and very close to the Soviet Union's border, the United States' position became stronger, as it would be easier to attack the western part of the Soviet Union from there. When the Soviet Union learned of this, they decided to install their nuclear weapons closer to the United States. The best spot for this was none other than the island of Cuba, located just 200 kilometers southeast of the United States. At that time, Cuba had a pro-communist government, which the United States found intolerable. In the eyes of the US, Cuba was an ally of the Soviet Union, the true stronghold of communism. Communism meant that all businesses would be controlled by the government, with everyone receiving an equal share, thereby preventing the formation of rich or poor classes in society. In contrast, the United States wanted the world to adopt a capitalist system with a free market where anyone could conduct business and generate profit. The US intended to invade Cuba and establish a capitalist regime there, but Cuban President Fidel Castro had the support of the Soviet Union, which also supplied weapons to Cuba. However, under the guise of fostering good relations with Cuba, the Soviet Union had other plans. Soviet President Nikita Khrushchev struck a secret deal with Cuban President Fidel Castro, agreeing that the Soviet Union would install its intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, in Cuba. In return, the Soviet Union would protect Cuba from any US attacks. The secondary benefit of this deal was that Soviet nuclear warheads could easily target the South American region. This deal remained top secret, and the Soviet Union began installing its ICBMs at various locations in Cuba without anyone knowing. Rumors about this spread across the United States, causing widespread fear and panic as people believed that Soviet nuclear missiles had already been installed just 200 kilometers from Florida. The White House denied all these rumors, and during the 1962 state election campaign, people were assured that these rumors were baseless. To uncover the truth, the U.S. Air Force used U-2 spy planes. The spy plane captured images over Cuba, clearly showing medium-range R-12 and intermediate-range R-14 ballistic missile facilities. These photographs were enough to confirm that the Soviet Union had tightened its grip against the southeastern part of the United States. This news hit American President John F. Kennedy like a bolt of lightning, and he decided to teach Cuba, which was already a source of anger for the U.S. The plan was to conduct airstrikes to first destroy the Soviet ICBMs and then, with full force, the United States planned to take over Cuba, a move that had been long overdue. This plan by the American president was practically an invitation to World War III, because an attack on Soviet missiles in Cuba would be considered an attack on the Soviet Union itself. If that happened, a nuclear war would break out, which would be uncontrollable. On the other hand, when the Soviet Union learned of America's intentions, they prepared to retaliate. Part of this preparation included the Soviet B-59 nuclear submarine mentioned at the beginning of this video. It had been ordered to hide in the depths of the Caribbean Sea near Cuba. The submarine's crew had full authority to launch a nuclear torpedo missile without needing permission from Moscow if a war broke out. The submarine had gone so deep, evading U.S. Navy detection, that it had lost radio contact with Moscow. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy suspected the presence of a Soviet submarine in the Caribbean. They dropped small bombs in the area to signal the submarine to come up to the surface and identify itself. These bombs from the U.S. Navy were actually signal depth charges, an anti-submarine weapon that, if exploded nearby, could destroy the entire submarine. The captain of the Soviet B-59, already out of contact with Moscow, believed that war might have begun and it was time to fire the nuclear torpedo missile. Although the crew had full authority, the launch of the nuclear missile required the agreement of all 3 officers on the submarine. 2 of the 3 officers were in favor of launching the missile. However, one officer, Executive Officer Vasily Arkhipov, was against it. A heated debate ensued within the submarine. Arkhipov argued that launching a nuclear missile was too risky without confirmation that war had started. The debate continued for several minutes, and finally, it was decided that the B-59 should surface to re-establish contact with Moscow and understand the actual situation. While this was happening on the B-59 submarine, Russian and American presidents were meeting to neutralize the escalating tension. It was agreed that the Soviet Union would withdraw its nuclear missiles from Cuba on the condition that the United States would not invade Cuba later. This was the public deal, but it was later revealed that the United States had secretly agreed to remove its nuclear missiles from Italy and Turkey as well. This tension, which lasted for 12 days, is known today as the Cuban Missile Crisis. During these 12 days, the tensions escalated so much that both countries even sent their nuclear missiles into space. This meant that if the war didn't start and they survived, the missiles would be detonated in space. But if they didn't survive, the missiles would hit their targets directly. Since the crisis was resolved, the nuclear missiles were detonated in space. Meanwhile, when the B-59 submarine surfaced in the Caribbean, they made contact with Moscow and were ordered to return to the Soviet Union. Historians believe that Executive Officer Vasily Arkhipov is the man whose historic decision allowed us to live in the world today. Otherwise, this nuclear war would have been so severe that there might not have been any trace of human life left on this planet. We hope you like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe our channel. See you in the next amazing video.